Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be with you this afternoon. Thanks for having me. I am speaking with you from New York City, otherwise known as the unceded territory of the Lenape. Just want to share some thoughts that I've been thinking through in light of the last year and where do we go from here? Basically, I think our lives are forever changed because of the last year or two. So, just want to share some reflections there, and I'll look forward to having some time for questions and answers. In early March 2020, when the coronavirus pandemic was just a shadow on the horizon in the United States, my grandmother passed away at the age of 83. As soon as I heard this news, I didn't think twice. I immediately got on a plane to North Carolina to spend time with my family, to grieve, and to celebrate her life. We shared meals together, we hugged, we cried, and laughed. We honored the matriarch of our family. Little did I know when I left a few days later that that would be the last opportunity I would have to see my family for months, to travel, to hug people, to eat and gather around a table, or do any of the countless simple joys that this virus has taken away from us. When I think back about that time, I can't help but wonder if I had known how bad things were going to get, would I have acted differently? Would I have held my mother a little closer, knowing it would be months before I would see her again? Would I have savored the home cooked meals a little more? Would I have taken more time and effort to heal those old family wounds that now feel so trivial? Given what I know now, with my loved ones relegated to FaceTime calls for months, Zoom calls on a computer screen, I'm sure I would have done all of that and more. But that's what a crisis does to us. When the world around us starts to crumble, when death suddenly looms in front of us, the everyday troubles fall away. Suddenly, there's a sense of clarity, a focus on what really matters: our family, our communities. Before the pandemic hit, we already knew that 2020 would be a big year to contend with. We knew that it was an election year and we were preparing for a fight. And we thought that maybe that would be our biggest obstacle. Then, on top of that, we had to focus on day to day survival, on trying to keep our families and friends alive in the midst of a devastating pandemic, and so much more. The truth is, we've been facing a triple pandemic. First, there's COVID-19, the deadly virus that has swept the globe and upended millions of lives in the United States because of the government's negligent and dangerous response. Second, there's the economic fallout from the pandemic, with millions of jobs lost, lines at food banks that grew by the day, and small businesses around the country shuttered for good, disproportionately those in communities of color. And beyond all of that, there's a third and arguably more devastating crisis: the pandemic of white supremacy that has infected our society so deeply that Black and Brown people have not only endured the most devastating financial losses of the pandemic, but were also being put in the hospital and dying at rates far higher than their white peers. For Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color, white supremacy has been the pre existing condition that has exacerbated every other pain. But for the first time in as long as I can remember, what they call everyday America, middle America, i.e., white America, is waking up to this pain. With death sweeping the nation, there has been a sudden clarity. What we were experiencing for the first time in my lifetime is a vast collective suffering, a vast grappling with death, a pain and isolation, a loneliness and fear that has left few communities untouched. Fear for our lives, fear of the unknown, fear for our families, fear and scarcity mindsets. When I think back to my grandmother's funeral, I realize how lucky I actually was to be able to gather with the people that I love to bid her farewell. For the millions around the world who have lost loved ones these past few months, they've been robbed of even that most basic human dignity, the right to grieve and say goodbye. And in the middle of all of this, with the number of cases that were increasing, the death toll rising, we then saw the horrific murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. Y'all, we literally saw it. As many of our loved ones lay in hospital beds struggling to breathe because of this deadly virus, a healthy young man who has survived COVID himself lay choking in the streets under the knee of a white police officer. The pain and suffering that Black people have experienced for generations spread across the country. Sorry, New York City. Those sirens go by. As the video of George Floyd's death went viral and the uprisings for racial justice around the country began, for once, even those folks who have been protected and maybe even sheltered and have been before untouched by the suffering of the masses could not look away from the pain. And many more began to see that because of white supremacy, they too were dying in vastly different ways. But yes, we are all impacted by this. As a nation, George Floyd became our brother, our son, taken away by the insidious virus of violent racism. And so we took to the streets, thousands of us, Black, Indigenous, Latino, white, with a simple but powerful slogan: we are done dying. In the midst of the national tragedy that has been the pandemic, the motto of the movement for Black lives, we are done dying, has suddenly become brutally clear for thousands. For the millions who march down city streets and country roads, we are done dying. Whether consciously or not, the idea was felt widely and embraced around the country. We, as a nation, were finally just done. We were done with COVID-19 and constant death. We were done with the lack of response from the federal government. We were done with the division. We were done with the anti-Blackness. We were done with the police murder. We were done with seeing our kids being dragged down the hallways of school by police. We were done with a lack of investment in our communities. We were done with not having enough and not having what we need. We were done with the broken promises of the federal government and every single broken treaty. We were done with our destitute so-called democracy. What is coming from this collective exhaustion and national breakdown, rising from the ashes, is actually something beautiful, a different type of solidarity than I've ever experienced. Seeing the multiracial unity and solidarity for the movement for Black lives, seeing the response, the mutual aid funds, the memes, the tweets, people opening their doors to tear gas protesters, the millions on the streets night after night, that made me see that deep down below our messy, dysfunctional national surface, there is a human bond, a commonality, where we know that as human beings that we have to take care of each other, that we can't rely solely on philanthropy or charity, that we can't rely on the government or the police. When push comes to shove, all we truly have is each other. It just took a national crisis for us to see it. But this collective moment wasn't just a sentimental outcry or a cheesy Hallmark commercial. It has become a call to action. Across the country, cities became battlefields as thousands put their bodies on the line to say that enough was enough. Social media was inundated with demands for justice. Celebrities spoke out. Government officials were heckled and called out for doing too little for too long. And the White House itself was surrounded by people demanding the best of a nation that has for too long promised too much and done barely enough. And guess what? It's actually working. Politicians in major cities were forced to commit to defund the police and reinvest in our communities. Large corporations were called out for not doing more than branding around Black Lives Matter. People were publicly shamed and lost their jobs for making racist phone calls. What so many people said was impossible or could never happen has started happening. After a decades-long outcry and organizing from the Native American community, the Washington national football team was forced to retire its racist name. And even in philanthropy, the sector where I work, which has been so slow to embrace change, a transformation is happening. People have begun to realize that just giving is not enough. We need to be redistributing wealth to the front lines to fight for racial and economic justice, using our financial power to heal centuries of inequality. In my book, I wrote that a thing about this 10% tithing almost 3 years ago now, where I said that, it would be great if foundations just took 10% of their endowments and handed over to people of color. And at that time, people told me that that was nothing more than a pipe dream. And I think I kind of believe that myself, to be honest. That idea has suddenly become a concrete reality with a few foundations, including the Bush foundations, who have committed to actually trying to do this. And Bush, in their case, is actually doing this. They've committed to take the equivalent of 10% of their endowment, or $100 million, to pay out as reparations to Black and Indigenous communities in their region. And now, after the sounds of protests have faded, after the Instagram posts and banner websites have been taken down and the streets are empty, but for the Paint at Black Lives Matter slogans, I'm starting to wonder, was it enough? Have we as a nation and as a sector, as people who care about change in our community, come together to think about fighting the racial injustice and centuries of harm caused by colonization and white supremacy? Was it enough? Yes, the officers who killed George Floyd were arrested and charged, but he is not with us anymore. The officers who killed Breonna Taylor and so many other unarmed Black people remain free, oftentimes still patrolling the streets, their hands at their holsters. Black and brown communities remain ravaged by COVID around the world, many unable to pay rent, and all the while, all the Senate could do was go on vacation. As the US continues to battle this triple pandemic of COVID-19, its economic toll, and white supremacy that underpins it all, I'm thinking through what it means for us all to come into this awakening that as a country, we're done dying, we've had enough. And when someone is dying, the things that seemed important before start to feel trivial. Imagine this. If you were given a diagnosis by a doctor that you only had a few months to live, many of you would choose to reprioritize your lives. I know I would. Maybe you would begin to center people in relationships. You would apologize for harms and wrongs and mistakes that you made in your past. You would tap into your spiritual life and want to make sure your soul was right. You would want to reconnect with folks that were estranged. This is where we are right now and why we, people committed to a better society, must lead in the work of healing. Death has been all around us, and what truly matters is again coming into focus. We need to look critically at the past, not to reopen old wounds, but to acknowledge and heal them. For the people who have lived with the gaping, centuries-old wounds of white supremacy and colonialism so long, we need a chance to heal. And for those who have never felt that pain and have benefited from the system as it is, you all need to ask yourselves, how can I be a part of this collective healing? What will I have to give up so that we can all heal? Now, I know that everyone is not going to ask these questions. Not everyone given a few months to live would undertake this kind of evaluation. I know that much is clear. One version of our country is dying, wailing in its last throes, kicking and screaming its racist tantrums until the end, with deadly consequences for the rest of us. But that is not who we need to be. What if we agreed that we didn't want to return to the way that things were, but embrace the connectivity that we felt so deeply over these past months? What if the clarity we've gained through this deadly pandemic could be carried through to a new and better future? What if we could be reborn as a new country, one no longer steeped in white supremacy and weighed down by the trauma of colonialism? What if we embraced our humanity, this fragility of life that the pandemic has so brutally exposed, and brought that thirst for the here and now, that focus on what truly matters into our relationships, our work, and our worldview going forward? I think that would mean that our communities, our workplaces, our families, our cities, our country would be reborn into something better. I think it would yield the impossible becoming possible a lot more often. I think the things that we thought would never happen could begin to happen. If we could collectively heal, it will be like getting a new lease on life. We will be less selfish. We will look outwards at the needs of others and decenter ourselves. It would be a different type of solidarity, a grown-up solidarity. It would be different with the economy, a new and better society, a stronger, more inclusive sector, a better country. As we stare down 2020 and move into the coming months, may we believe that the healing that we all seek is possible and make it so. Thank you.